Here's the reality. Designers are expensive. A decent logo can run you a few hundred, if not a few $1,000s. If you're a small business owner or just starting out, that can seem like a lot of money to throw at something. It's likely one of the bigger upfront investments you'll make. Reaching out to an artist and getting a staggering quote back can be disheartening. It might even cause you to rethink what you're doing. But when you get a crazy quote from someone who's going to hook up your sink, what do? Just not have a sink? No, you watch some YouTube videos and go to Home Depot, and then you do it yourself. It works for design too. Now, this isn't a video exploring the creative depths and unlocking the artist you always knew you were inside. This is a practical guide to creating your own professional logo and brand identity by staying within some rails and following some basic rules. You don't need to know any big terms or even be artistic. I'll break it all down for you. The first rule's simple. Just start. You can build on it later. We're looking for 3 solid elements to get you off the ground and moving. In a year, as your business has grown, you can always come back and add on later. I work on projects like this all the time. They didn't have a budget originally, I told them to try it for themselves, and once they had money, we circled back and built a full identity. Any designer will tell you, these are the best clients. They understand the process and have a clear view of what they need. And since they've already done most of the legwork, it cuts time in half and costs in half. Rule 2, keep it simple. If you've ever swung a baseball bat, you're not going up there trying to launch bombs, calculate launch angles and spin ratios. You're just trying to make contact. Bat hits ball. That's it. If you don't have any design experience, we're not going to worry about color theory or anything like that. We're just trying to follow the simplest steps possible to make it look good. That's it. Look good. Rule 3. Type is king. Sorry to break it to you, but you're not getting an illustration out of this. It takes years of practice to become a competent illustrator, and it's exponentially harder than just working with type. You don't need it anyways. Look around at how many great companies only use a word mark. It's a lot. Fonts are basically art in letter form. They have their own personalities and convey certain vibes. All you have to do is hit some keys, and you'll be laying out type more or less like I do. After these 3 rules, we just need to make sure we actually understand our brand. If you're making rugged leather wallets, you're not going to be using hot pink and scripty lettering. You're using dark, earthy tones and a heavy typeface that conveys sturdy, weathered vibes. Really, all we need to create an identity that someone can feel in their bones is the right font and the right color. Showing someone your brand is great, but if you can make them feel it, you're doing something special. Now, the brand we're working with here is called West of None. There isn't a ton of meaning behind that name right now, but we can already tell it's similar to the Walla guy. It's going to have a more rugged identity. Could be a bar in Tucson, could be a hip mercantile in Austin, could even be that dude's leather good company starting out in his parents' garage. The important thing is we take that feeling from the name and try and distill that into type. I'm working in Adobe Illustrator. It's not free, but it is worth it. You can probably bootstrap these steps together in some free online software, but I do recommend investing $30 into this. The first thing we're doing is just writing out the brand's name in the default font. Hit your caps lock first. It'll look better. Just trust me here. Now, I have a huge font library. You don't need that. You just need one solid font that fits what you're doing. To match the vibe of the name, I'm searching for something with an earthy, rugged tone. Please just don't use anything that comes preloaded on your laptop. Even if it's not an awful font like this, it'll have been used into oblivion. Some are free, some cost a few bucks, but anything is better than this. I'll link a few places to find them in the description. The font I'm going with is actually one I made, called Oaxaca. What I'm doing here is opening up the characters tab next to the font name and increasing the tracking. This basically just gives the letters more room to breathe. It's a super common practice, and keeping that number somewhere between 100 and 200 usually does the trick. Right now, every word's the same size. If you think about it, of is the boring one here, and probably doesn't need as much attention. Because west and none are the same length, scaling down to of should make for a more interesting look. And there we go. Our first word mark's finished. This guy should be simple, straight across on one line, letting the character of the font do the talking. Clean, simple, and conveys the message we're after. The second piece is going to have a bit more flair. Now, the biggest giveaway for a cheap brand is having one logo that you use for literally everything. Ever see an Instagram profile picture that's something like our first word mark? The text is so small in the circle, you can barely read it. It's a dead giveaway. This is why we're creating multiple marks. We want a few things that are tailored for different situations. Now, like our first mark, if your brand is just one word, this is going to be really easy. You'll just use the shape tool to draw a circle, hit the text wrap tool, and start typing, and you'll be done. If your brand name has a few words, like ours, it's going to be a few more steps, but the end result will look great. You can see here I've created 2 separate circles and typed out west on top and none on the bottom. For the bottom, I've grabbed that little blue line and turned it inside out. Now it reads the right way, but it looks a little smashed. We're going to use the align tool to center both of these guys. Then take the none circle and drag it until it hits the top of the letters on west. This will make the letters larger, so you'll just have to use the eyedropper tool to make everything the same size again. Or you can also manually do that by changing the text size at the top of the screen. From here, we're just going to go back and forth with the text size and tracking until we get something that feels pretty good. You don't want huge letters, you also don't want huge gaps between them. Since your name's probably going to be different than mine, the length will determine these two factors. Don't stress too much on the exact settings or numbers, just go back and forth until it feels right. It's kind of like balancing a scale. Add a little, take a little away, until you get it right where you want it. Trust your eyes. You've seen good logos before. You'll know when you see it. A super simple trick is just pulling a black rectangle in from the Shapes tool. This will help you rotate the circles until the text lines up just right. We don't want words crashing into each other. Since I don't want to make the text any bigger than this, I'm going to use a couple dots to fill the extra white space between the words. This is a really easy way to add some depth while also balancing the piece. If you wanted to go really wild here, you could add smaller text, like the initials of the city and state your business are in. I've saved the center of the circle for the word of. Like the first mark we made, I'm going to shrink it down just a bit. When text is all the same size, it can end up feeling kind of heavy. A little variety in size can add interest and hit the eye a bit nicer. Our second mark's done. Like I said earlier, these kind of pieces are great as social media icons, but can also serve a ton of other purposes. I've seen clients make them into stamps and apply them to all their packaging. Our third and final mark is where we get to experiment a bit. We want to show more context as to what the brand's all about. This can be things like dates, locations. I'd stay away from slogans, but if you're into that, it might be a good spot for it. If your brand name's one word, you can probably just use the first mark as a starting point. Since mine's 3, I'm going to stack them for something a little bit different. Now, I actually kind of like this one already on its own. You could call it good right here, but I think we're going to try something bigger. With this Western vibe we got going, a classic motif is adding a couple little trademark pieces. It's something I do a lot in my work. It mainly serves as a balancing element. If I add something to one side, I want to add something with the same or similar weight to the other. You'll notice this piece just got a lot taller with the trademarks. It's especially noticeable since we've got these big white spaces on either side of the word of. I'm going to find some longer text to add to either side. Since I'm in California, we're just going to use that. It's about the right length and add some context to the brand. The hard part now is finding another word that's about the same length. Luckily, provisions is the exact same length. Sometimes you get lucky like that, sometimes you got to break out the dictionary for a bit. The important thing is both these words add context to the brand. They'll give people a little bit better idea of what we're actually doing. We could call it good here, but as we're making this third piece, you might have noticed it's taking on a diamond shape. We're going to accentuate this by building a shape behind it. You totally don't have to do this if you don't want, but having one piece be this much bolder than the others will go a really long way into spicing things up and giving you the illusion of having much more variety than you actually do. I'm not doing anything crazy here, mostly just taking these endpoints and stretching them out until it fits the rough shape of the text. Yours could be any shape you like. After that, I'm just copying and pasting the triangle, then using the reflect tool to make it even on both sides. Since this is a rugged Western brand, it doesn't really make sense to have this perfect clean shape. It just feels too digital for the vibe we're working with. To fix this, I'm going to run it through my usual process. Odds are you're not going to need this, so don't even worry about it. But if you want to learn how, I covered it in my first creative process video. I'll link that at the end of this. Basically, all I'm doing is roughening up the edges, blurring them, and then using the image trace tool to make the diamond look like it matches the text or has been beaten up over the years. I'm actually going to do this to all the pieces we just made for a more cohesive look. What I really like about this is the smaller the text is, the less definition it will have, just like in real life. Little touches like that go a really long way into selling a vibe you're going for or an aesthetic. Alright, if you've made it this far, congratulations. The hard part's over and you've got some solid pieces to get you rolling. Now we get to relax a bit and play with color. The best way to go about this is to create some squares and pull your marks right on top of them. This is going to let us see what looks good and what doesn't right away. We want to test the colors as we go on the pieces, not conceptualize everything or pull a palette straight from Pinterest, hoping it works out in the end. If you know your brand and trust your eyes, you're going to do great. The first place I always start is in black and white or some offshoot of that. Again, if you're doing something more modern, black and white might be the perfect fit, but that's going to be too harsh for us. We're going for something earthy, and in the real world, things are rarely pure black and pure white. More of a dark charcoal and creamy off-white. These are things I almost always incorporate into my color palettes. They serve kind of as a base, and then we build on that with an accent color that's really going to drive the brand. So when we think about earthy colors, what do we think of? Probably browns, tans, dark greens, maybe a burnt orange. We don't have to test every color in the rainbow because we already know most of them won't work. So let's just pick a few and try those first. Now, like the fonts, I have a pretty big color library that I've collected over the years. You don't need all that. We don't ever want to directly rip colors from someone else's work, but it's totally cool to drag and drop a photo into Illustrator and then sample it. If you're just starting out, mixing colors with the sliders is pretty damn hard, so skip all that. Find a color you already like. When you're doing this, try and separate a design you like from a color you like, because they're very different things. The color might look good because the design is really good. The two aren't always directly connected. Now, keep in mind, while you're doing this, you get white, black, and one accent color. Singular, one. Let's keep it simple. The less we do here, the better. After you've landed on a color that fits, like I have with this forest green, we're officially going to create our color palette. I do this by dragging in 3 circles and sampling each. The green is our accent color and goes first. Then the secondaries follow. We want this blocked out color palette for easy access later on. You'll see what I mean. Now that we have our colors down, we're moving on to the type palette, another very important piece of the brand. This is going to give an aesthetic to everything you write and needs to match the vibe of the brand. Good news is we already know our first font. It's the same one we made our logo with. We only need 2, and a great way to keep things cohesive is to just use the font from your logo as the main text for headlines and anything important. I like to type out the full alphabet just so we get a good feel for everything. Next is the body text. This is secondary. It's not supposed to have a ton of character. It needs to be a legible workhorse. You get 1 Rockstar font and 1 desk job font. They need to contrast both scale and weight. If both of them are crazy with a ton of character, it's going to feel cluttered and really hard to read. If both of them are super legible, it might just be kind of boring. So we want a clear contrast between them to balance each other out. Now, I already have something in mind for this project. I can't completely remember, but it might actually come standard on your laptop. If not, I know you can find it with a pretty quick Google search. I'm going to use Courier New. This is a great secondary font that has just the right amount of balance of character and legibility. It's roughly molded after an old typewriter, but has been cleaned up for a more contemporary look. You can really see the contrast between it and our main font, and that's exactly what we want. If the two are too close in weight, everything's going to feel muddy. Generally, our main type will be heavy and our secondary type will be light. That's a good rule of thumb when you're starting out. Here, I'm just creating a little sample of what these two might look like when paired together in the real world. Remember, always choose type that looks good together, never just because you like them both in their own ways. Well, we've officially done it. That's everything we'll need to start a brand. The final step is laying out what we just made into a brand document. You want to have one of these. It's a quick guide to your identity and lets you or employees really quickly sample all the elements if they need to create something day to day, like a flyer, a sign, or an email. They're super handy to have around and keeps employees from destroying your identity. The brand doc really just breaks down into a couple parts, and this would look pretty similar to something you get from a designer. The only thing that's usually added is a how-to part where they say things like, don't turn the logo upside down and make it pink. No kidding. The easiest way to go about this is creating a 4-page doc, first with a cover page. This is where your main mark's going to live. Next, a page for all your secondary logos, like the circle and the cooler lockup we made. Third, a place for the color palette, so you can pop in and sample your colors for all the assets you'll be creating. And finally, the type palette, just so you know everyone's using the brand fonts for everything they make and display. Well, there it is. That's everything. All the tools you need to get rolling. I know that might seem like a lot, but just remember rule 1, start. You'll figure it out as you go. And in the end, you'll be proud of whatever you end up with. Hopefully this helps a few people out. Can't wait to see what you guys make. And until then, I'm James, and I'll see you in the next one.